So as if the NASCAR at Indy story couldn't get any more complicated, we had today. I don't even know where to begin. I actually do know where to begin. I think this race was a very typical Brickyard until it wasn't. If you eliminate that last 10 laps, I think I would describe this race as very similar to what we saw on the oval. Now, granted, this was a road course, so you did have a little bit more outbraking maneuvers than you would typically on an oval, especially with the current oval track package. But I will say that I think a lot of people watching this race at the beginning were baited into kind of the shiny new toy syndrome. Like, they looked at this and said, this is good because it's different. But ultimately, what my eye saw was Kyle Larson running away with this race for the majority of it. I mean, I think the first stint was probably the most interesting, where he had Chase Briscoe, who had a great day until he didn't, William Byron, Chase Elliott, and Kyle Larson all kind of going at it for the lead. The stages, again, I'm not saying anything that you haven't heard before. Stages on a road course really kind of upset the flow of the race, I think. But I think for the majority of this race, it was just a typical NASCAR road course race, which was, to me, totally fine. And in fact, at points, I was watching this race and going, you know what? While I'm a traditionalist, and it's disappointing that the same race that was so hyped and that Jeff Gordon once upon a time won in front of, 200,000 people, like, I understand that they had to try something. They had to do something different. And I thought, hey, I could get used to this. But then you had the last 10 laps. Before I totally get into that, AJ Allmendinger did win this race, and I guess I'll talk about this because I want to stay a little bit positive, because I do think that was a fantastic win for AJ, a fantastic win for Colleague Racing, which as of right now is certainly not a team that you would think is going to win a cup race, much less at Indianapolis. So I think, it's cool to see AJ Allmendinger win here, especially considering his open wheel career. The guy's named after AJ Foyt. I don't know if you knew that, but the guy should have been here. The split prevented him from being here. He got here in the 500 once. Probably could have won that race if not for some loose belts. So to have AJ Allmendinger have a win in a top-level series at Indianapolis is cool. But again, I do worry that it's another thing that people are going to judge this race positively for, that perhaps wasn't earned. Because ultimately, if you don't have what was a perfectly legitimate debris caution, by the way, the last 10 laps probably plays out where Kyle Larson runs away with this race and takes the checkered flag. The last 10 laps. I'm gonna need a drink for this. I'm gonna need one of these. So they in the media center, they gave us these. They were trying to liquor us up. So I'm glad they did, honestly. Thank you to Buddy for throwing that over to me. Last 10 laps. So when that debris caution came out, I knew that the chicane was going to be the place to be. So I wandered over there. I was like, okay, there's something small is going to happen, and there's going to be a yellow, and it's going to be, look how stupid this is. I didn't realize quite how stupid it was going to be. Martin Truex Jr. spun, hit the wall. I don't even think they threw a yellow for it. They come around the next time. The curb on the inside of the temporary chicane here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway came up and spun 10 cars out. Terrible looking accident. You had Joey Logano burying as deep into the tires as I've seen a stock car, probably since Jimmy Johnson lost his brakes at Watkins Glen back in the day. Thankfully, everybody was okay on that one, but you had a red flag that was one of the most ridiculous red flags I've ever seen in my entire life. Not so much the fact that there was a red flag for it, because I think, we talked about necessary and unnecessary red flags a while back with Will Power at Detroit. This was certainly necessary. What is unnecessary is sending cars that are damaged, clearly, like leaking oil, like James Davison's was, and letting them run an entire lap before you finally park them. If a car's leaking oil, it's been in a crash, just park them. I guarantee you this race would not have this race did not miss James Davison in a Rick Ware car in the last green-white checker sequence, okay? And the fact that they didn't red flag it immediately after the car, it was clear that it was going to take a long cleanup to get all that oil off of the racing surface, because Denny Hamlin was leading at that point. Denny Hamlin was light on fuel. I mean, what were they thinking? I mean, honestly, what were they thinking leaving him out there? And the curbs itself, I mean, that in and of itself leads to a discussion, because ultimately the decision was here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to move the Cup race to the road course. Those curbs are temporary for a reason. That's the main straight on Indianapolis, or the back straight, is called Holman Boulevard. Holman Boulevard forever, probably as long as the track has existed, has been a throughway all the way from the center of the track, from the north end to the south end, or the south end to the north end. And you can't really build like a racing corner, right in the middle of that area. And so they have temporary curbing there to create that chicane, which they did to reprofile the track in 2014. I do not believe they should have run this configuration of the track. And in fact, in some ways, after seeing 2 or 3 accidents all at once, which were red flag, two of them were red flags. In fact, Brad Keselowski managed to crash twice in this race and didn't get a single yellow for either crash, which was interesting. But if you have to run the road course and not the oval, and I'm not convinced totally that the oval is not going to be used next year with the next gen cars, just to see what happens, but I think you have to use the F1 course, the horseshoe down there, because you can still use that. I think the motorcycles used it when they were here, because the IndyCar configuration isn't going to work, because the Cup cars especially, apparently the Xfinity cars weren't tearing up the curbs quite as bad, because they have a ride height restriction in place, so they have to be run off the ground. The Cup cars, when they hit these curbs, would just tear them the hell up. And so what happened in that first crash is the curb was like perpendicular, and it was sending all the cars in. I mean, this race in a lot of ways was a disaster in a lot of ways, because we know Roger Penske likes his grass pristine. They tore up a lot of grass today, but perhaps more importantly, from a NASCAR team perspective, especially when we talk so much about right-sizing the sport, the fact that there's not as much money in the sport anymore, when you tear up virtually the entire field, this was not an inexpensive weekend for NASCAR. I mean, this was essentially a restrictor plate weekend in terms of crash damage. So yeah, it's something that's going to have to change ultimately with this, because as things are currently configured, it ain't going to work for NASCAR. And I don't want to invoke 2008, because I think it is a little bit different, but ultimately you do have kind of that compatibility problem. You have now found a compatibility problem with the NASCAR Cup cars on this road course. So if you want to continue racing them on the road course, you're going to have to find a solution to continue that legacy. And the legacy of NASCAR at Indy, like I said, is extremely complicated. So, yeah, man, I kind of feel like this race, we're going to talk about this race for a while, because I think it's going to have some long-reaching implications for the future of NASCAR at Indianapolis. Now, does it mean that NASCAR at Indy is going to go away? No, I don't think so. At least until the next TV deal. Remember, the thing that keeps this race profitable is the fact that essentially you're selling the tickets for gravy because of the TV money to make this race happen, because NBC wants a NASCAR race at Indy. What happens after the next TV negotiation? I don't know. I can tell you this. The crowd itself here wasn't much better than it was yesterday. And quite honestly, I think yesterday's ticket, not just because there was an IndyCar race there, but because you also had Xfinity, which was a damn good race in and of itself with Austin Cindric winning. You had 2 pretty decent races, and it was good value for money. And that's the thing, too, when you look at like the NASCAR crowd versus the IndyCar / Xfinity crowd, there was 2 totally different sets of people here. You probably had 25,000 people on each day, which is probably where they got that 50,000 estimate they've been throwing around quite a bit. You probably had 25,000 people here, which is not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. But and I'm sure this makes the Speedway some money, but it's not. I mean, you think about we now know what 170,000 people looks like in this Speedway. By the way, it looks pretty full. So when you look at this track, and even on the infield and the mounds, I mean, it wasn't hard to move around to a place you wanted to see. Great for spectators, but probably not so good for the bottom line. Again, I'm not claiming that the race isn't profitable, but I do think that this wasn't like a smashing success, even if you don't account for the Cup race just being pretty much a complete disaster at the end. At the same time, I think a NASCAR IndyCar doubleheader could work somewhere. And I almost don't want to say it shouldn't happen here either, because I think it was a neat idea to have IndyCar, NASCAR all together. Like with any first or I guess second time event, first with fans, there were kinks in making all of the things work. I wonder if you could add like an IMSA race or something to one of the days to try to add a little bit more value. But I guess that's the final thing, and I'll bitch about this. This was the only NASCAR race, Cup Series race this year, that started at 1 p.m. Aren't we glad it started at 1 p.m., having like an hour's worth of red flags there at the end? Because we probably would have gotten this damn thing stopped for darkness if we had started at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, like I'm sure perhaps the TV. And even so, they still got bumped to NBC Sports Network. So, what? Interesting. What an interesting race. Well, I'll finish with this. A.J. Allmendinger is, again, a NASCAR Cup winner. Colleague Racing is a NASCAR Cup winner. I bet you weren't expecting to have that headline in this video. I'm gonna need that. Yeah, I'm gonna need that. I'm gonna like Stone Cold Steve Austin this thing right now. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. And give me a hell yeah, brother.